Oh, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And at first I thought that today, I was about to start by saying, well, today won't be about a controversial subject in gaming. But actually it really is going to be about a controversial subject in gaming. It's just not going to be about a controversial subject specific to the culture war. It's going to be about how gaming itself, people are teaching people the wrong ways to run D&D and other RPGs. And I've brought out my setting books, especially Dark Albion, which is the only purely setting book I've made. Cults of Chaos, which is a system book that lets you have a whole bunch of tables to create evil sects, cults, heresies, witchcraft, etc., etc. And of course we got the old school companion there, which is got all kinds of stuff to bring more medieval authenticity. I also got a new tripod, so I'm kind of testing it out here. All right, there we go. It seems like it's going to hold up, but it looks flimsy to me. I don't know, it might fall down at any second and with potentially hilarious results. Anyway, so what I'm talking about today is this question that I think a lot of gamers, especially newer gamers, have a lot of problems with because they've been guided wrongly, which is, how do you prepare a campaign? How do you set it up? How much prep time should you use them for? What should you be prepping for? Right? Because one of the questions I've had the most often is, oh, how much time should a person have to prep in a session? Because it seems like it would be really hard. How do I prepare the whole adventure, right? And of course they're asking the wrong question there, because they're already assuming that the first step is that they have to create a whole adventure each session that they play, and that's the prep time, right? And that's fundamentally wrong. Okay, so we've already started from a bad first step. In point of fact, what you have to do with an adventure is you've got to make it part of a campaign world, right? Now, like, if you've got a pre-made adventure, obviously this is all kind of irrelevant, but we're talking about, we're assuming here that someone wants to run a whole campaign, and that it's not just one of those completely pre-made campaigns. Sorry, getting my yerba mate ready here. And if that's the case, then the first problem is that most people nowadays, and most people for quite some time now, have mistakenly bought into this idea that preparing for a campaign is going to be based on, that a campaign is going to be run, that a game of D&D should be run in this way, that the DM is a type of storyteller, right? He's the master storyteller, right? And obviously all the live stream stuff, Critical Role and stuff like that, has contributed to promoting that same error. Because it's only something that works if everybody playing is an actor that is, already in on the scam, right? This is the thing. You can look at your game as if you, the DM, are this master story crafter, right? And you're creating this sophisticated fantasy novel or a fantasy TV show in your mind, right? And then the most important thing is what's going to be the story of that TV show, that novel, or whatever. And then obviously the second most important thing are going to be, who are going to be the really important NPC characters that you want to be super cool in this incredible fantasy story you're making, right? You see where we're getting into problems here, right? And then a distant third to that will be, well, what about the rest of the world? It doesn't really matter, because all that matters is that we carry through with my story, right? So we just need to detail the parts of the world that have something to do with the story I, the DM, want to tell, right? And then, way behind all of that is, oh yeah, there's also going to be players. They're mostly going to be there to see what clever thing I've done, right? And they'll get to fight things, and they'll get to get magic items, and they'll do some cool shit, but they aren't going to fuck up my story, right? That's the main thing. They're here to be my audience, right? This is the model of the DM as the master storyteller and the players as the audience, who are not really going to be interacting with the world in any meaningful sense. They're only going to interact in the things that the DM allows them to, which is the things that have no chance of actually thwarting his story. A more clever DM might make a variant of that, which is the DM is still the storyteller, but it's a bit of a choose your own adventure, right? So what it means is that he's going to be willing to not force the players to just go set piece to set piece through a bunch of events that they have no power to change. He's going to let them have 2 or 3 or 4 maybe different possible paths that they could go, that he's really planned out. And this is like a guy that people look at and go, oh, that's a Matt Mercer level of genius, big brain right there, right? That's the real way to do it, right? Is give the players 3 choices of how they might end up having, you know, how things might end up turning out, right? They might be able to help Prince Mary Sue to recapture the kingdom, or they might turn against him, or they might fail, and then they're going to have to go off to this other kingdom where I'll start another exciting fantasy novel disguised as an RPG game, right? That's not actually much better. That's just something called illusionism, right? Like it's giving the impression that the players have actual real agency, when in fact they only have a very limited agency, right? In the first version of what I was talking about, they have none. So when you're creating a real RPG setting, you're not a storyteller. If you're playing D&D or RPGs properly, you are not the DM, you are not a storyteller. The DM is not there to be a storyteller. The DM is a god, okay, but he's a clockmaker god. He's a god that what he does is he creates a world, right? He fills it with things and people in it. There are events happening. Those events are going to happen regardless of the player characters being there or not. But then there's going to be other events that the player characters are going to do, which are going to cause other things to take place. And the player characters are exactly, not more and not less, protagonistic as all the NPCs in that world, right? So within the limits of hierarchy and authority. Obviously, an NPC character who's like, you know, the second in line for the throne is going to have certain abilities that a PC character who's you know, a peasant isn't going to have, right? But in an inherent sense as human beings, neither of them is fake, right? Neither of them have no real power to change anything in the world. Both of them have the potential to do things that will make a difference in that world, okay? So you're saying, well, but how can you make a story out of that? Well, the answer is you can't, right? You can't. You can make a history out of that. You can't make a story, okay? You're not there to be the master storyteller. You're there to make the world as intense and fascinating and interesting as possible. So how do you do this and how do you prep for it? First, you prepare the campaign, right? So I could spare you a lot of time. You could buy Dark Albion, right? Dark Albion has a pre-made campaign. It's got everything in there that you need. It's got a whole bunch of really fascinating NPCs. It's got adventure hints. It has a complete chronology of future events that details things that will potentially be happening in the future of your campaign. So you can think based on that how the NPCs are going to be, you know, those are based on what things the NPCs are going to be doing as time goes by. And you can then, you know, see where the PCs are going to fit into that and how they're going to affect those things and change those things, right? So all of that is already done for you. If you want to, you can buy the book. That's perfect, right? There are some other settings that are basically that. In fact, most classic settings are basically that, just maybe not done as well as Dark Albion is, if I say so myself. But if not, if you want to make your own, that's fine too, right? The first thing you have to do is figure out what your world is, right? Is it, you know, what kind of genre is it? What, you know, place and time it's in, you know, like what is it? Is it completely fantasy? And if it is fantasy, what type of fantasy, right? Is it Gonzo Wacky Land? Is it super dark fantasy? Like what do you want to make, right? That's all basic stuff. I'm not going to elaborate on that anymore. But the point is, you think up what world you want, and then you think up what NPCs you want, put them into power clusters, right? Assume that there's different groups, right? Like what are the groups, the people, the groups of interest here? It might be, you know, this kingdom versus that kingdom. It might be merchant companies, the church versus the crown. It might be, you know, there are orcs coming from the wastelands. Why are they coming from the wastelands? Maybe something more evil is there, right? All that sort of stuff. figure all that out. What are all the pieces, right? And then the individuals. You have to know, you have to have certain important NPCs that you already, before you even start playing, you have an idea of what those NPCs are like, how they act, what motivates them, and think about how they would react to different situations, right? And you can't do that, obviously, with everybody in the world, but you have to also understand your world enough that you'll be prepared to at least be able to do that on the fly, right? That's what the DM does on the fly. He doesn't think up story on the fly. He interprets characters on the fly. He rolls for random events or picks random events on the fly based on what he already set up in all of his prep time, right? So, in fact, if you're doing this the right way in a campaign, you're going to spend a ton of time preparing to start that campaign. It usually takes me months of preparation before I actually start playing a campaign. Sometimes weeks, depends. If it's something I've kind of covered before, maybe a lot less, right? But if I'm doing something big and I'm doing it for a start and I plan it to be a long-term game, because none of this applies if you're doing a one-shot, right? Then who cares, right? But still don't be a storyteller there. Your players are the ones that are meant to be the ones that have agency, not you. You're meant to be the one that interprets all these other cool NPCs who also have agencies as NPCs. They have power as NPCs to make choices. They don't just exist for the players, and they don't just exist for your storyteller fantasies, right? They're real people. That's the absolute key, is that a proper RPG game is not a story being told. It's not a TV series, right? A proper RPG game is a world. It's a living world. It's a virtual world, but it's a living world. It's a world that changes, grows. It'll change and grow, not just where the player characters are, not just where your favorite NPC is, but everywhere. And it'll have a living sense to it. And the players will become, as they play their characters, those characters will become more and more real to them. Just like the NPCs will become more and more real to them, just like the events and the places. And that's the key of role-playing. That's the thing that is the most satisfying, right? That's why I say this is the proper way, because you might say, oh, that's just subjective, right? But it's not. Because think about it. Who the hell really wants to just be a cheerleader to you as a C or D grade fantasy author, right? Like, if you think you're such a master storyteller, then stop playing RPGs and write a goddamn book, right? Like, write a novel, get it published. You know, you can self-publish these days. That's probably better, actually. You'll make more money. And try your luck that way. Don't imprison a half dozen gamers and force them to listen to your fantasy novel while you pretend that they can do something about it with their characters, right? That's not the right way to go about it. So the players have to be able to have agency. They have to be able to change stuff in the world. And of course, there can be a story that is going on, but it's a story that is a product of events that are taking place. So you're not controlling the story. It's not about showing off how brilliant you are. It's about these events simply happening, right? And it's not meant to be a chance for you to show off your story-making skills. In a way, it can be a way for you to show off your acting skills, because you're going to have to get into the heads of a whole bunch of different people in your setting and interpret what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And when they're interacting with the PCs, how they're going to interact with the PCs. That's your job. In total, it means that the game looks like, from the point of view of preparation, you're going to be spending a lot of time preparing before you start the campaign. But once you start, if you've done all your homework, if you've got the chronology set, if you know what these characters are like, if you know what events are going on, there can be very little to zero prep time, because depending on your players at that point, one of two things will happen. Either they will be allowing themselves to go along with the course of events, so all you have to figure out is what's the next thing that's happening, and they can just kind of go along with it. Or, more likely, in my experience, especially with players that have some kind of experience as old school players anyways, they're going to have a bunch of ideas of stuff they want to do. And then you just let them do it and see how that clashes with events that are going on. And if the players ignore some big event that's going on, just let them, right? See what happens as that goes along. If they're ignoring that orcish invasion from the Badlands because they, I don't know, because they want to do some, oh my God, so random things in the city or whatever, right? Because they're idiots. Then you've got as DM, your job isn't push them, force them to go to that really exciting battle you had thought up. No. Your job is to see what they do while they're in the city, and at the same time track just how far those orcs have invaded into the kingdom, right? And who else is there to try to stop them? And maybe someone else can stop them, and maybe someone else can't. You got to figure all that out. If the players don't want the glory or the risk, then don't give it to them, unless nobody else can stop them, and then the orcs are going to be at their gate, and then that'll be their problem eventually anyways, right? You've got to treat this as a real world, not as a novel, not as a comic book, not as a TV show. Your setting is a real place, and that's the important part. There can always be exceptions, right? If you're, obviously, one of the things, oh, there goes a meatball. One of the things is if you're doing an emulation of a particular genre, then there will be elements in that genre. You still have to be very careful to let your players be the protagonists. Let them make the ones that have the choices, not just be there to watch you tell a story, right? But obviously, if you're doing something that is from an established novel, an established comic, etc., etc., you're going to want to make it reflect the world. It'll still be a living world, but it's got to be a living world that reflects the rules of that world, right? You can't make a, Teen Titans campaign that uses just like the assumptions of the D&D setting and rules, right? Like with ultraviolence and stuff like that, right? That's not, it won't fit, right? So you've got to make the right rules for the thing and the right setting for the thing. But that's just obvious stuff. And there might be occasionally some other particular campaigns that you might be running where you want to do stuff in a more abstract way than kind of deep immersion. I'm sure people will comment about that in the comments. But as a rule, on the whole, for the most part, this is the right way to run an RPG, and you will be happy you did it this way. You work out the details, and you can, if you think it's like, oh, that's too hard, well, pick up really good material that'll help you craft a campaign beforehand, right? Like I said, Dark Albion, you got a complete setting right there, right? Stuff like Cults of Chaos makes it very easy that if you're in the middle of an adventure, or in the middle of your campaign, and the players are just not interested in going somewhere else for an adventure, well, then roll up a random cult and have it there and wherever they are, right? And then see what happens for them, right? Like see how they interact with that cult. Maybe they'll just leave there. Maybe your players really just don't want adventure. I don't know. But you've got stuff like this, workbooks, that will help you to do the little prep that you're going to have to do during the campaign as it goes around, right? Like usually it won't take a lot of preparation because you've done the homework before, and that's the key part. Anyways, if you like this video, please share it everywhere. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. I really appreciate it. The YouTube algorithm is not helpful to people who aren't in the kind of SJW side of things. So help would be appreciated. And if you'd like to support me, I do have a PayPal and a Patreon. But I always tell people the best way to support me is to pick up my products. I've got 3 examples here: Old School Companion, Dark Albion, Cults of Chaos. But there's Lion and Dragon and Arrows of Indra. But you can also pick up my RPG Pundit Presents series. If let's say you don't want to, I mean, these aren't very expensive books. None of them is the most expensive one I think is $30. But if you can't afford that right now, but you'd still like to help out, then you can get an RPG Pundit Presents PDF from my RPG Pundit Presents series. There's 102 different PDFs, all filled with the sort of stuff I was just talking about here. Stuff that'll help you to flesh out your campaign world, or to give you random stuff to put into it in the process as you're going along. So lots of great supplements for both medieval authentic or gonzo gaming, and a lot of pre-made adventures that are set up in the type of example of what I'm talking about. They're what we could call Sandbox Adventures, right? These are not adventures that say, well, the players start here, then they must go here, then they go here, then they see this, then they hear this guy do this cool thing, and then they're done, right? No, it's not like that. It's not linear. It's an open thing. There's stuff happening. They've got things that are going to happen at different times, but the player characters can interact with that adventure any way they like. That's how I do my adventures as much as possible, again, with certain exceptions, right? So check out the RPG Pundit Presents series. They're not expensive, and they'll be bound to help you out. Hey, here's Meatball. She was just being really cute. Now she's just sniffing stuff, apparently. So anyways, thank you very much for everything. Share the video. And yeah, again, thank you. Currently smoking. a Ben Wade Rhodesian plus Argento Latakia. See you later, Meatball.